Foundation paper piecing, or FPP, is a quilting technique that is used when we want to create intricate blocks with details or with shapes that are harder to make with traditional quilting pieces. But can we do this with memory fabric or t-shirt fabric? Yes, we can. Stay tuned and I'll show you how I made this Air Force logo with memory fabric using foundation paper piecing, or FPP. Hi, I'm Julie Patterson of JCT Quilting, and I want to help you turn your memories into quilted treasures. This Air Force logo block I purchased from Craft Towards Joy on Etsy. It is not a JCT Quilting design, it is Craft Towards Joy. And I have her permission to make this video to show you how I made this block using the remnants of this polo shirt. There's not much left. And this Air Force Academy blanket that is rather large. I don't need the whole blanket for the memory quilt I'm making, so I was able to use a lot of it to make this block and another block. So in this video, I will show you how I used foundation paper piecing, or FPP techniques, to make this block using the shirt and the blanket. Printed off my FPP pattern, and I've cut out each set. You don't want to cut, I choose not to cut on this line. I like to leave it and I'll trim it to size later, but you can choose. This is the 1/4 inch seam, so this is the dark line. We will be sewing on all the dark lines. This is the line where you will be cutting this block eventually for any of these pieces. Sometimes it's represented by a dotted line. And now I'm going to get started. You will want to follow whatever the pattern says to do. In this case, I'm going to work on each of the blocks and then I'll put them together in the order in which the pattern indicates. A looks like it has a ton of little pieces, so I'm actually going to hold off on that one, even though normally I would go in alphabetical order here, because I know I will get a lot of pieces from the offcuts from everything else. So I'm going to hold on to that one, and I'm actually going to start with B. So let me show you what I do for B. So within B, you can see that I have a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4. So that's the order in which I should put the pieces together. And she, the author of this pattern, has nicely color-coded so that I know where I need blue and where I need white. I am using an Air Force Academy blanket for the blue, and then offcuts of a white polo shirt for the white. I've already stabilized. It's hard to see, but this is stabilized. I just didn't want to, I wanted to minimize the stretch of the polo shirt. The blanket was not very stretchy. It's pretty solid. So I've decided I can use it without stabilizing it. And I'm just going to work with scraps to make this B piece. So in some FPP patterns, they will give you sizes to cut to. Sometimes they know you're working with scraps or you're just going to use what you have. So in this case, there are no sizes. So I'm just going to work with what I have, and I want a piece that is larger than this blue square. Remember, we want to come all the way out to here at least, and then we need at least a 1/4 inch on each of the other sides. I actually like to go a little bit bigger just because I get nervous and I want to make sure I don't cut it too small. So in this case, I'll probably just, I want to keep it to like here, mark my line, and then get nervous one more time. So I at least want to go that far, that far. Sometimes I will also measure. That's the wrong side of the ruler. Just to be more precise, but in this case, that looks great. So I will stick with that. Now, what I say to myself the whole time while I'm doing FPP is right sides together. So what you want to start with is wrong side, and it's hard to see on camera, but there is a wrong side. Wrong side goes on the back of this, where that blue spot was. And I like to put a little dab of just Elmer's glue right in that spot, kind of hold it in place. And sometimes it can help to hold it up to a light source. I find that really just holding it up to an open window or a light can help. But you can see even on this, so I'm sticking it so that it is much beyond the 1/4 inch on each side that I need. And it's stuck. And so now I'm going to go in order. So B2 is next. You can use any ruler that you have, or if you have one of these add a quarter rulers, these are really helpful when doing FPP, so I'll show you both ways. So first, with a ruler, some people like to guesstimate this. I like to be a little more accurate. As you get more comfortable, maybe you'll also choose to guesstimate. So I line my ruler up on the line that I'm going to be sewing, B1 to B2. And I'm just going to use kind of my thumb to fold it back. And then what I want is a 1/4 inch seam. So I will line my 1/4 inch on my ruler and then cut the excess off. And what that has done is given me the line for which to put this white piece of fabric. So now I need a white piece of fabric for B2. That looks plenty big. That again, will go a 1/4 inch over both ways. And actually for this one, I know that I need an extra 1/4 inch or so off the edge. The pattern is for 12 by 12 and I actually need it to be 12.5 by 12.5. So I'm going to include a little bit extra over the edge. And hopefully I'll remember. And then as I said, that line that we cut is where we're going to line this up. That's our 1/4 inch. And then to hold it in place, I recommend using some flat pins. It'll just be easier as you're sewing. And so that is just going to hold it in place. And I'm just going to stitch B1, B2. I'm going to start my stitch here, backspace, and then I'm actually going to sew off, because why not? But I will backspace in this seam allowance. So you can see I stitched here, and I know I'm not doing anything else here, so I don't mind stitching extra, and it just helps keep my extra fabric secure. If I go too far past here, I'm going to have to rip those stitches out. And so for me, I have found I'd rather just make a good sturdy stitch right here with a backspace and not sew past this line so that I don't have to remove those stitches. But it's kind of a personal preference. If you want to stitch out here a little bit to secure it and then work with those stitches as you get to this part, that's fine too. So I did that. So now I'm going to remove my pin. And then you can iron. I have found I don't like what the iron does to the paper. And also a lot of times I'm working with T-shirt or memory fabric that is stabilized, which is fine, but sometimes it has decals on it, or it's fabric that I'm a little bit nervous about putting under an iron. So I enjoy using just a finger press. A good finger press will do, or you can buy a seam roller or use a seam roller and just kind of press that seam. And that is good. Okay, so I did B1, B2, now I need to do B3. That requires a larger piece. This won't get that out, get that far. So I have a quite large piece, which is fine. And yeah, it looks like that should be enough. Okay, so again, I'm gonna this time I'll show you with the 1/4 inch ruler. So I line the ruler up, fold on that line. And this is where if you had stitched further out, you will need to work with those stitches and maybe rip the paper a little bit. The nice thing here is that it has a little lip, so it just kind of tucks onto your paper where you folded and helps hold it in place as you cut that 1/4 inch. So I have the 1/4 inch. Press that down, and I'm going up here. And I know I want to go a little extra on that side. So I'm going to lay it there. And in this case, I'll probably use 2 pins. You want to make sure when you pin that you don't put it too close to where you'll be stitching, because you're going to be stitching on the other side. You won't see it. So you want to bring it far enough away from your stitching line that you don't accidentally stitch over your needle, or your pin, sorry. So I'll put these down here. And then I'm going to go stitch on this B2, B3. Again, I'm going to start here, and then I'm going to stitch off down here because I'm not worried about down here. And you want to make sure you reduce your stitching length. You can see here, you want to go down to something between a 1.5 and a 1.8. I usually do a 1.6 or 1.8. This will help when it comes time to ripping the paper. That shorter stitch makes it very perforated and it will make ripping the paper a lot easier. Okay, I'm gonna go stitch this line. Okay, this line is stitched and I just have one more piece and then I'll be done with B. So I'm gonna take these pins out. I'm going to first finger press, get that thread out, and then I'll use my roller a little bit. And then I need a piece for B4. So definitely with all this extra fabric, I want to get rid of that. So I'm going to line up my ruler. Plus, in this case, I might be able to use some of that for this next part. Get that going, trim it. And then I need a piece that's that big. Okay, that looks like it will work. So I'm just lifting the paper to see where the edge is. And again, right sides together. That's very helpful to remember during this. So this is my wrong stabilized side. And again, this piece is long enough. I'm going to use 2 pins. And I'm going to go stitch, and in this case I can stitch off both sides. So I'm going to back stitch and then sew all the way through and then back stitch at the end. Then I'll come right back. So I finished that. So let's open this and then finger press and roll. This might also be a time, now that it is done, that I would maybe heat set, or you can wait until the end. So part B is done. You can trim it to size if you want. Again, I know I need some extra space at the bottom, so I'm going to leave that there, but I might trim these other sides. Plus, again, then I can use these offcuts for some of the other pieces. The other thing you want to remember with foundation paper piecing is you're actually sewing in reverse. So this is what it will look like. And it can be a little confusing when you're looking at the image, trying to make sense of it in your head, knowing that the image is flipped. So it can be helpful to just remind yourself of what it looks like on the other side. Okay, I'm going to trim some of these sides. I don't need to save the paper, but I do want to save these pieces because they might come in handy later. Those are too small to save. Okay, and again, I'm going to leave this bottom piece because I do end up needing it to be a little bigger, so we're going to see if that works, although I don't have enough fabric there. Oh, that might work. So I'm going to leave this part at the bottom and not trim it yet. This is the bottom edge of the pattern, and so I'm just going to wait and trim it at the very end. You can choose to take your paper off now. I like to sew pieces together and then remove the paper, but it's another matter of personal preference. So for me, it's time to move on to the next section. Okay, I'll walk through another section slowly and then we'll move on to the rest. So I'm saving part A for the end because it has all the little pieces from all these offcuts. So I'm moving to C. My C1 in this case is actually this big white section, and then I will need this little blue, and then C3 is this even bigger white, and then this little white for C4. So I need to start by finding this piece that is big enough to take up. Remember, I need at least 1/4 inch on each side. I also know I will need, but I believe for me, I will need more down here. So you want a piece that is bigger than this, at least 1/4 inch bigger on each side. I'm going to test out some pieces. This piece looks great. Some of it is not stabilized. You can see it's a little flimsier, so I'll make sure that goes as part of the offcut. But that is definitely big enough. So we'll get my glue. And I might even do a couple dabs. It's a bigger section. And again, I want to make sure the stabilized part is on the stabilized part. With that triangle, I think that will do. You just want to get at least to this line, and then on this side and this side, you just want to be at least 1/4 inch. So you can sample your pieces, see what works best. I think this will work. And then because I'm attaching C2, I'm going to trim that line. So I line up my ruler. Again, some people will just fold the paper back, guesstimate where the 1/4 inch is, and cut. I just feel a little nervous when I do that. So I like to line it up, get my 1/4 inch line, trim it, save that for other pieces. And now I need a blue piece. This one's a little too big, but that's okay. It'll work, and I'll trim it later. Right sides together. So I'm going to pin it. You can also, before you pin, kind of guesstimate, that looks like 1/4 inch, kind of fold it up or fold it in the direction. And then again, hold it up to the light. That looks like it will be plenty big enough. And just kind of sample out your piece and make sure it fits. It can be frustrating, though it definitely happens, so don't feel bad if it does. But it can be frustrating to seam rip because your piece didn't fully extend or doesn't fully cover the desired area. And although that section is small, this is a big piece of fabric, so I'm going to double pin. And now I will take you to the sewing machine so you can see that I'm just going to sew that part. Okay, before I start stitching, I want to call out one more time, my stitch length is 1.6. Really, I could do 1.8, 1.6, either one. Your machine might have 1.5, something in that range. It will help tremendously when it comes time to ripping this paper off. Okay. So now I'm going to stitch on this line between C1 and C2. So I line it up. And there you have it. You can see I started at the line so I don't have to worry about the stitches when I get to this piece, but I was able to go way past the line because there's nothing over here, and I'll just end up trimming off the excess if I don't need it. And I made sure to back stitch at both sides. I have a shorter stitch length, and now I can go remove the pins, fold it over, and then move on to the next section, which will be this big one. Okay, so we just stitched there, so let's remove the pins. Fold back. You can cut off that part beyond, but I know we're about to cut it, so I'm not going to worry about it. I am going to finger press and roll. And then C3. So I did C1, I did C2, now it's time for C3. Fold it back, get my 1/4 inch, trim, save these for next pieces. Now I need a big piece for the C3. So I happen to have this large piece. So I think this might be a straight line. And I don't mind, this piece happens to have a seam in it. Again, I'm working with memory fabric. This is from a shirt. So for me, this just adds character. It just is a reminder that it's a shirt and not quilting cotton. So I don't mind that, but you could certainly work around that and find a different piece. But this looks like it's going to be long enough. So I'm gonna do this. And again, if I'm worried or wondering if this seam will show up, I can fold it up a little bit and I can see, yes, it will be part of it, but again, I don't mind. Okay, and do that. Pin it in place. And now I will go stitch on this line along C3. I will back stitch here and then stop here, but back stitch. Okay, I stitched my C3. I'm going to remove the pins. I'm going to fold it back, finger press, and add a roll. Okay, now I'm on C4, so I'm going to find a little white piece of fabric that's not stabilized. That will work. And remember, I need to go at least to these seams and at least a 1/4 inch down. So although it is a small triangle, I need to not look for a piece that size, but a piece that is a 1/4 inch bigger on all sides than that size. Okay, it looks like, I'm just going to test it on this side. That will be good. Yes, that will be fine on that side. So I'm ready to fold it back. Cut my 1/4 inch. Right sides together. Oh, and I don't need to go that high. So I'll just do that. And 1 pin should be sufficient this time. I will go stitch along this line. Okay, I took the pin out. I'm going to finger press it open. Now my C is done. I am going to trim. So I am not going to trim this side or this side because those are the edge of the block. And again, I need this block to be a little bit bigger. So I'm going to save that for later. But I can trim these 2 sides, which is great because I need some of this fabric, or it would be nice to use it on some of the other blocks. So let's trim these 2 parts. So I'm using my straight edge to cut along the outer line of this pattern. You want to make sure you're not cutting on the seam allowance line, but on the outer line. Okay, so block C is now ready. So I have B and I have C. Unfortunately, the pattern says I need to put A and B together, and then D, E, F, and then C, and then A, B combines with it. So I don't yet have anything that I can sew together. So I'm going to sew a couple more blocks, and then I'll meet you back here, and I'll show you how to put the blocks together. Okay, my D, E, and F are done, so now I'm going to stitch them together. I'm going to keep the paper on until they're fully stitched together. Actually, probably until the whole thing, and then I'll just take all the paper off. Again, you want to remember, with FPP, we always remind ourselves, right sides together. So we don't want to do this, we want to do this. And I find that this gets pretty thick with all the paper and the fabric, especially working with this memory fabric. So you can, I clip it. So I will use these clips to hold it in place while I'm sewing, if I use anything at all. But you can use a pin to make sure corners line up. So for example, I want to make sure this corner is going all the way through. So I'm going to make sure it goes through my fabric. And I'm just going to poke it all the way through. It's a little off on that one. But you can pin it and make sure it goes all the way through. Okay, I got my pins in the two corners and make sure those are lined up. I have my clips to keep it all in place. And now I'm going to stitch along the line, and I'm going to remove my pins before stitching, and my clips I'll remove at the machine. Okay, the first two are sewn together. Now I can follow the same process to bring in that third piece. I'll use the pins to line up the corners, the clips to hold it in place, and I'll stitch along the line. This section is now complete. Remember, on the paper side it's backwards, so look at the other side to see your good work. Now I'm ready for the next section. I'll follow the same process once again, line up the corners with pins, use clips, and sew along the line. Okay, so we pieced C to D, E, and F, and now that part is done. So we basically have the right side of the logo done, because remember it's reversed, so even though it felt like we were sewing the left side, we're really sewing the right side. So now I need to do the A, B, and then the left side. And I already have the B done, I just need to do the A and the left pieces. So I will work on that. Piece, you can see all these tiny little pieces, all this little stitching. I have been back stitching, especially around the center, not always out here. Trying to start my lines out here, and then when I get in here, definitely back stitching. But I'm on this last one. These are some tight curves, some little pieces, but I know it's going to look great. So I pieced A and B together, and I have my C, D, E, F, so I believe it's going to go like this. Okay, so we have our A, B, our C, D, E, F, and this will go here. So I'm going to line up these two corners and these two corners, because I'm keeping this extra down here. I can't really line up down here, but I can still line up these parts and stick my pin and then use clips to get this rest. And there are some thick seams, and we're just going to work our way through it. Okay, it is stitched. Oh, you can see the star starting to form. That's encouraging. And now I will work on the other pieces, and then I will sew the two halves together. J are now trimmed, except for the spots where I'm leaving extra. And so now I'm going to piece G and H together, and then IJ, and then I'll do the HI seam. And then we'll take this whole set and pair it with the rest that I have. It is now pieced. Look at that star that came out. And it appears, even in this bulkiness, the seams are where they need to be. So I'm going to take that. I am going to, before I trim, it is now time to rip out paper. When ripping paper, you want to start with the last thing you did, or go in reverse order. This middle part is probably going to require a lot of tweezers. So, for example, on this C section, you want to start with C3, and in this case, we're just basically starting on the outside and working our way in. And we used short stitches, so just the best you can, you just kind of rip. And you can hold those seams. And then where all these seams come together in the middle, you might need to get some tweezers or something a little more fine-tipped. But once you start, they kind of all just happen as a result. So I will come back later and get tweezers for that middle part. I'm just going to start with the edges at this point. And just going to work my way around. Papers are out. I used tweezers to get into all these little tight spaces, and I have pressed it, and it is now ready to be trimmed for my block. So if you were making this and you wanted it true to size, you would have cut along the edges. I actually need the block to be bigger, so I will come back later and trim. But it is now ready to be used as a block in my quilt. Just for a few takeaways or reminders, remember that you always want to do right sides together. It can get a little crazy, especially if you're working in a small area. Right sides together, just remind yourself of that. Go back to just traditional quilting, right sides together. We want the fabric right sides together. It'll really help. It has saved me a lot to remember that sometimes. Also remember, if your piece ends up being a little too small, it's okay. That's one of the great things about foundation paper piecing. You already have a lot of lines, a lot of sew lines, usually. So if you have to throw in an extra one to match up some fabric because it's just not fitting, no one will know. They'll just think it's part of the design. In fact, let me see. Yeah. So you can see over here, I was short on the fabric, so I added in an extra seam, but you can't even tell because there's this seam that was in the fabric, and it just looks like it was part of it or it was part of the design. So don't be afraid to mix and match pieces, piece pieces together to make what you need them to be, and just have fun using foundational paper piecing, or FPP, with your memory fabric. Thank you for watching this video on how I use foundation paper piecing to make this Air Force logo. You can see I've added a little more white space so that it fits in the quilt that I am making. And I will put a link to this pattern. I got it on Etsy from Craft Towards Joy. I will put a link to this pattern in the description for this video. So make sure you go get that if you're interested in making this. I think this is going to make a great addition to my Air Force memory quilt. And here is a picture of that block in the quilt hanging at my local quilt show. Thank you for watching this video and sticking it out with me with all of this foundation paper piecing.